Today on the channel, we are making Japan's favorite snack. No, it is not sushi, even though that may be our favorite Japanese snack here. If you've ever been to Japan, you would have seen in every convenience store, every shop, every department store, something that you can often find outside of the country. We're making onigiri. Onigiri is essentially a rice ball, and there are so many different ways of making it. So many different ingredients, so many different shapes, so many different styles. I'm going to show you a few different ways of doing it, starting with the most absolute basic one. All it is rice and salt. To start, you need some warm cooked rice, and if you don't know how to cook Japanese rice, go to the video up here and we'll show you exactly how to do it. This is koshikari rice, sushi rice, sometimes it's called, but it hasn't been seasoned with vinegar or sugar or anything like that. It's really good to start making just a basic salted onigiri because it will show you, I guess, the technique of how to do it without having to, I guess, complicate matters with all the other flavorings we put in. So let me just put a little bit of rice into a bowl now. I'll cover that up and keep it warm. And so the way to make onigiri, essentially, take a little bit of water, wet your hands ever so slightly, and then just salt on your hands. A handful of rice, and you can start to mold it into a shape. The way is essentially by cupping your hands together and rotating the ball of rice in your hands and pushing it together. You don't want to mash the rice together. The process is not actually pushing it and squeezing it with your fingers. It's essentially just forming your hands into a shape and the rice moving into that shape. So you're not forcing the rice, you're just making the shape. And primarily, you're not pushing with your fingers, you push with your palms. This is the really important part. A lot of people see this action and they think you've got to push really hard with your fingers, but you don't. You push with your palms and then turn it around sort of 180 degrees as well, so that you are not just creating this sankaku triangular shape, but you're also creating, I guess, an even-sided area around the outside. So it's a triangle, but also even width around the width of it. Now, the grains of rice in an onigiri should still be separate, the same way that if you were having sushi. If it's all mashed together, it's not going to be a tasty onigiri. The way that this is being seasoned is just from the salt that's on your hands. So that's essentially it. That's your very, very basic salted onigiri, but we're not quite finished with it yet because it needs to be wrapped in a little bit of seaweed. This is nori. Nori is the kind of seaweed that you might see around sushi or something like that. It's really worth your while to get good quality nori because good quality nori tastes completely different to lower quality nori. It has both a shiny side and a rough side. That's important for making sushi, but also slightly for onigiri as well. So get a pair of scissors first and just cut your nori into a width that is slightly less than the width of your onigiri. The onigiri is going to sit inside that and it's going to fold up around the outside. So I'll cut the nori in half again. And you're going to start to see that classic onigiri shape. So just drop the onigiri right in the center, fold it up on either side, and it keeps the rice from sticking to your fingers because you've got the nori to hold onto, and that is your very, very basic salt onigiri. Now that you've got that one down, let's move on to something a little bit more advanced. So with the rice that's left over here, I can make a couple more onigiri. I'll show you how to do a filled onigiri now. It's a slightly different process, but still very similar. I'm going to fill this with umeboshi. Umeboshi is a plum. It's first sun-dried and then pickled in sugar and salt until it becomes kind of this sweet, sour and salty, wrinkled looking pickle. It's got a seed in the middle, so you have to take that out first. I'll split the umeboshi with my fingers, remove the plum stone, and then this is what goes in to my onigiri. Same process as for the salt onigiri, wet hands, bit of salt on the hands, and then handful of rice and mold that first into kind of just a patty. The umeboshi goes inside and you kind of add a little bit more rice around the outside. So now when you mold your triangle shape, umeboshi is completely contained inside. Use the other half of this nori and again, just wrap and now filled onigiri. The next onigiri I'm going to make is furikake. Furikake is kind of a mixture, a salty, savory, sometimes slightly sweet, seafoody, seaweedy mixture that you put on top of rice, or in the case of onigiri, you mix through rice. It kind of often looks like this. You can buy it in packets from Asian or Japanese grocers. But when you sprinkle it on top of your rice, it's kind of extra seasoning. You don't want to use too much because it can be quite salty. So if you can get your hands on some furikake from somewhere, go ahead and use that. Now you just want to mix that into the rice quite well. Now, of course, because the furikake is already seasoned, you don't need to salt your hands when you're making this. Still, a little bit of water on your palms. By the way, if you don't want to keep using water on your palms to mold the onigiri, you don't want to be touching it, of course you can just use plastic gloves or even just use a sheet of plastic wrap and put the rice in the center and mold it that way. Exactly the same process, a handful of rice. And instead of doing, I guess, the standard Mount Fuji or mountain shape, I'll do this one in a round shape, like a hockey puck, which is another very popular shape for onigiri. Same process, still pushing primarily with your palms on either side, not your fingers. If you use your fingers, that's when it gets really easy to squish the rice together too much. If you use your palms, it's a much more even pressure, and the even pressure makes sure the rice can actually remain as separate grains. Still holds together, you know, I can still throw it up in the air, it still holds together, but it just isn't mashed together. You don't want mashed rice, it's not supposed to be mochi. When it's about the right shape, don't keep overworking it, just kind of put it as it is. I'm gonna leave that one without the nori on it for the time being, because that is gonna be our furikake onigiri. Now, the last thing I want to do is, if you're thinking, oh, that might be a good idea, I might make some furikake onigiri, but where do I get the furikake? I'm actually gonna show you how to make your own furikake. Really, really simple to do. You just need a few dried ingredients. I've got here some dried prawns, really popular as small dried shrimp as well. Some shio kombu, this is some kombu seaweed that's been cooked with a bit of salt. Aonori, this is a different kind of dried seaweed, sea lettuce actually. Some bonito flakes, and I'm gonna take another sheet of nori to turn into my own furikake. Oh, the last ingredient, some sesame seeds as well. The first thing I want to do is toast this, and that's just waving it over an open flame, over on the gas burner there, so I'll do that and come straight back. Now, when you toast nori, it becomes really quite brittle. It's got a lovely aroma as well. It's kind of like, I don't know, toasted seaweed, I guess, because that's what it is. But I've got a blender here, break it into some little pieces. I'm gonna blitz that together with the katsuobushi. This is dried bonito flakes. And this will form, I guess, the base of my furikake. Just throw that into a clean bowl. Next thing I want to put in is just some of this dried shrimp. I'm not really following a recipe here. I'm just kind of going off what I've got lying on hand. But I want things that are kind of salty and savory, that have a bit of a seafood flavor to them. You don't want to powder everything. I think furikake is at its best when it does have a bit of texture to it. So you see this dried shrimp is still, you know, quite flaky. So once you eat that with the rice, it's going to feel a little bit more like a meal, I guess. This aonori, the sea lettuce, I'm just going to throw that in as is. Some sesame seeds as well. And then for this kombu, I might actually just roughly chop that because I don't want to blitz that up. It's still quite small as it is. Just season that now just with a touch of sugar. It still should be a very savory thing, but a touch of sugar is quite good. This is a dry furikake. You know, you can make a wet furikake by taking these kind of ingredients and cooking them down with soy sauce and mirin and using that as a topping for rice. But I think this dry furikake is so much better for making onigiri and things like that. Bit of salt, and then we just mix that together. So I'll just throw a little bit more rice into a bowl, and into that I can mix some of our homemade furikake. Again, wet hands, because this is already seasoned, we don't need to season it again. Just a handful of the rice, and I'll mold this into our triangular Mount Fuji shape. Might actually wrap this one with nori again. Now you can just pack your onigiri into a lunchbox, but the really important thing is you can't put onigiri in the fridge. You have to keep them at room temperature, so eat them within about 4 to 6 hours, because if you put them in the fridge, they'll become a bit starchy and the rice will really dry up. Such a simple thing to do, but so delicious. Onigiri.